The power lines sparked in the darkness as Sarah's trembling hands connected the final wire to Karen's pristine golf cart. 3 weeks of stolen electricity, 3 weeks of her diabetic father's medication spoiling in a powerless refrigerator, 3 weeks of Karen's smug smile every time their eyes met across the property line. But as the modified circuit hummed to life beneath the cart's polished exterior, Sarah realized she might have just crossed a line she could never uncross, because Karen wasn't just the neighborhood tyrant who'd illegally tapped into her power grid. She was also the mayor's wife, and tomorrow was the charity golf tournament that would determine the fate of the entire community center. The morning Sarah discovered the theft, frost still clung to the October grass like accusations waiting to be spoken. She stood in her backyard, coffee mug forgotten in her hand, staring at the thick black cable that snaked from her electrical meter across the chain-link fence and disappeared into the manicured paradise that was Karen Whitmore's property. "Dad, you need to see this," Sarah called through the screen door, her voice tight with disbelief. Frank Martinez shuffled onto the back porch, his 73-year-old frame moving with the careful deliberation that had become his norm since the diabetes diagnosis. His weathered electrician's hands immediately understood what his daughter was showing him. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, setting down his insulin pen to get a better look. "Someone's been stealing our juice, Mia." Sarah's jaw clenched. The electricity bill had doubled over the past month, and she'd been working extra shifts at the diner just to keep up. Now she knew why. It has to be Karen. Look where that cable goes. Frank squinted across the fence line, where Karen Whitmore's sprawling colonial sat like a monument to suburban excess. Solar panels gleamed on the roof panels that, according to neighborhood gossip, hadn't been properly connected to the grid due to some permit issue. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that the woman who preached about community responsibility at every town hall meeting was literally stealing power from her neighbors. "We call the electric company," Frank said simply. "This is theft, plain and simple." But when Sarah called, she learned that proving electrical theft required an official investigation that could take weeks. The customer service representative, speaking in the bored tone of someone who'd fielded this call 1,000 times, explained that they'd need to send an inspector, file reports, and follow proper protocols. "Meanwhile, she keeps stealing from us?" Sarah asked, watching her breath fog in the cold air of their poorly heated kitchen. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we have to follow procedure." Sarah hung up and immediately marched to Karen's front door. The brass knocker was shaped like a pineapple, because of course it was. Karen Whitmore answered on the third knock, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair catching the morning light like spun gold. She wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Sarah made in a week. "Sarah dear," Karen said, her smile as bright and artificial as the solar panels on her roof. "What brings you by so early?" "Cut the act, Karen. I know you're stealing our electricity." Karen's hand fluttered to her chest in mock surprise. "I beg your pardon. There's a cable running from our meter to your property. My dad was an electrician. For 40 years we know what we're looking at." "Oh, that old thing?" Karen waved dismissively. "That's been there forever. Part of the original wiring when these houses were built, I'm sure. You really shouldn't make accusations without proof, dear." The condescension in her voice made Sarah's teeth ache. "Proof? The proof is literally hanging between our houses, is it? Because from where I'm standing, all I see is some old wiring that could belong to anyone? The previous owners? The electric company? Who knows?" Karen's smile never wavered. "Besides, even if there was some mix-up with the electrical connections, I'm sure it's all perfectly legal. My husband reviews all our municipal connections personally." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Karen's husband, Robert Whitmore, was not only the mayor but also sat on the zoning board and had his fingers in every municipal pie that mattered. Cross Karen, and you crossed the entire local power structure. "This is theft," Sarah said quietly. "This is a misunderstanding," Karen replied. "And frankly, I'm a bit hurt that you'd come over here with such serious accusations. We're neighbors, Sarah. Neighbors help each other. Help each other. My dad's diabetic. His medication has to stay refrigerated, and our electric bill has doubled because you're stealing our power. Meanwhile, you're living in luxury, while we can barely afford to keep our heat on." Karen's expression shifted slightly, the mask slipping just enough to reveal something colder underneath. "That sounds like a personal problem, dear. Perhaps you should look into budgeting classes. The community center offers them for free." Sarah felt her hands clench into fists. "You sanctimonious now." "Now," Karen interrupted, raising a manicured finger, "let's keep this civil. I'd hate for there to be any unpleasantness between neighbors, especially when the community relies so heavily on maintaining good relationships with local leadership." Another threat, wrapped in suburban politeness. Sarah had lived in this town her entire life, had watched Karen and her husband systematically squeeze out anyone who didn't fit their vision of the right kind of people. The Martinez family, with their modest income and Frank's Mexican heritage, had always been tolerated rather than welcomed. "Fix this, Karen, today." "Fix what, exactly?" "As I explained, there's nothing to fix. But I'll tell you what I'll have. Robert, look into the municipal electrical records. If there's been some clerical error, I'm sure we can sort it out through the proper channels. The proper channels meant months of bureaucratic runaround while Karen continued to steal their power with impunity. Sarah turned to leave, but Karen's voice stopped her. Oh, and Sarah, I do hope you'll consider your father's situation before making any rash decisions. It would be terrible if there were any complications with his medication access. The pharmacy does rely on municipal licensing, after all. The blood drained from Sarah's face. Karen was threatening her father's medication excesses. Keep her quiet about the theft. You wouldn't dare. I wouldn't need to, dear, as long as we understand each other. Sarah walked home on legs that felt like rubber. Frank was waiting on the porch, having heard every word through the thin autumn air. Mia, he said softly, we can't let this go. She's threatening your medication. Dad, if we push this, then we push harder. Frank's voice carried the steel that had made him a respected union electrician for 4 decades. You think I survived 40 years of job sites and racist foremen to let some entitled princess steal for my family? But as the days turned into weeks, Karen's theft continued. The electric company's investigation moved at glacial pace, hampered by incomplete paperwork and scheduling conflicts that Sarah suspected were being orchestrated from the mayor's office. Meanwhile, their bills soared, and Frank's insulin began requiring more frequent trips to the pharmacy, trips that ate into their already strained budget. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. On a Friday night when the power flickered and died, Sarah rushed to check the breaker box, but the problem was obvious. Karen had overloaded their circuit. The space heaters, pool equipment, and elaborate Halloween display that had been running off their stolen power had finally blown the main breaker. In the darkness, Frank's insulin monitor began beeping its low battery warning. Dad, where's your backup insulin? In the fridge, Frank said quietly. Was in the fridge? The power had been out for 6 hours. In the refrigerator, 3 vials of insulin, a week's supply worth nearly $400, had reached room temperature. They were ruined. Sarah stood in her dark kitchen, listening to her father's labored breathing and the distant sound of Karen's generator humming to life next door, powering the elaborate light display that spelled out Whitmore family in flowing script across their front lawn. That's when she made the decision that would change everything. Dad, she said quietly, remember when you used to do electrical work for the golf course? Frank's eyes found hers in the darkness. After 40 years of reading his daughter's moods, he knew that tone. Sarah, what are you thinking? Karen's got that charity tournament tomorrow. The one where she's donating her prize golf cart to the community center if she wins. The cart she bought with the money she saved, stealing our electricity, exactly. Sarah's voice was calm now, the anger crystallizing into something harder and more focused. She wants to play games with power. Let's give her a real game. Frank was quiet for a long moment, listening to the generator's steady hum from next door. When he finally spoke, his voice carried 4 decades of frustration with bullies who thought their money and connections made them untouchable. What do you need to know about golf cart electrical systems? As Karen's stolen lights blazed through the night, casting dancing shadows across their dark house, Sarah Martinez began planning the most elaborate electrical prank in suburban history. She had no idea that by tomorrow evening, Karen Whitmore would be unconscious in a hospital bed. The community center would be facing closure, and Sarah herself would be running from both the police and a truth she'd never seen see. Saturday morning arrived with a kind of crisp autumn air that made every breath feel like possibility. Sarah had barely slept, her mind racing through electrical schematics and voltage calculations until dawn. Now, standing in her father's cluttered garage, she felt the familiar weight of second-guessing. You sure about this, Mia? Frank asked, handing her a length of copper wire. His fingers trembled slightly, whether from age, his condition, or the gravity of what they were planning. Sarah couldn't tell. She destroyed your insulin, Dad. $400 we don't have. All because she couldn't resist overloading our circuit with her Halloween light show. Sarah stripped the wire with practiced efficiency. The pharmacy said they can't extend more credit, and insurance won't cover another supply until next week. Frank nodded grimly. They'd spent the morning at the emergency clinic, where he'd received a temporary insulin supply that would last exactly 3 days. 3 days to figure out how to afford his medication while Karen Whitmore lived in luxury off their stolen power. Tell me again what we're doing, Frank said, though his voice suggested he already knew and was hoping she'd change her mind. Golf cart electrical systems run on either 36 or 48 volts, depending on the model. Karen's got the new club car precedent. I saw it when she was bragging to the neighbors about her tournament preparation. That's a 48-volt system with 6 8-volt batteries, and Sarah held up a small device she'd been working on since 3 a.m. This is a voltage inverter circuit, modified with a timing relay. When she starts the cart, it'll seem normal for about 10 minutes. Then the inverter kicks in and starts feeding irregular voltage spikes back through the system. What's up? Gonna do? Make the cart behave ... unpredictably. Jerky acceleration. Random stops. Maybe some electrical feedback through the steering wheel. Sarah's smile was sharp as broken glass. Nothing dangerous, just embarrassing as hell during the biggest charity tournament of the year. Frank studied the device with the eye of someone who'd spent 40 years making electricity do impossible This is more sophisticated than a prank, Sarah. This is sabotage. She sabotaged our lives first. Two wrongs don't what? Make a right. Sarah's voice cracked with 3 weeks of accumulated frustration. Dad, she's stealing from us, threatening your medication, and hiding behind her husband's political power. The system isn't going to protect us. Maybe it's time we protected ourselves. Frank was quiet for a long moment, weighing 40 years of playing by the rules against the reality of their situation. Finally, he sighed. How do we get to her cart? Without being seen. The tournament starts at noon. Registration's at 11:30. Karen will be in the clubhouse, holding court and making sure everyone knows how generous she is for donating the winning cart to the community center. Sarah's voice dripped with disdain. That gives us about 20 minutes to get to the maintenance shed where they keep the carts overnight. Security cameras. The country club's been talking about installing them for years, but the membership keeps voting down the expense. We're a family community, according to Karen herself. At the last town meeting, Frank shook his head at the irony, her own words coming back to bite her. They drove to Willowbrook Country Club in Frank's ancient pickup truck, its engine coughing like a dying man. The contrast between their rust-spotted vehicle and the gleaming BMWs and Mercedes in the parking lot felt like a slap in the face. Sarah had grown up seeing this place from the outside, watching the wealthy play while her father fixed their electrical problems for a fraction of what they spent on lunch. The maintenance shed sat behind the clubhouse, a utilitarian building that housed groundskeeping equipment and the fleet of golf carts. Sarah had been here before 3 summers ago, when the club had hired Frank to upgrade their electrical panel after a lightning strike. She remembered the layout, the way the carts were arranged, and most importantly, the spare key hanging on a hook behind the door. There, Sarah whispered, pointing to a pristine white golf cart with Whitmore emblazoned on the windshield in gold script. Of course, Karen had personalized plates on her golf cart. Frank kept watch while Sarah worked. The modification took exactly 12 minutes. Remove the seat, access the electrical panel, splice in the voltage inverter, secure everything back in place. Her hands moved with the confidence of someone who'd learned electrical work from a master, but her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Someone's coming, Frank hissed. Sarah's blood froze. Through the small window, she could see a figure in country club blazer approaching the shed. She quickly closed the electrical panel and replaced the seat just as the door opened. Excuse me, said a young man with the eager smile of seasonal help. Are you folks supposed to be in here? Sarah's mind raced. They were trespassing, tampering with property, and one word from this kid would destroy everything. But Frank, with 40 years of talking his way past security guards and suspicious supervisors, stepped forward with easy confidence. Electrical inspection, he said, holding up his voltage meter. Mrs. Whitmore called about intermittent power issues with her cart. Said it was jerking during practice rounds. The lie rolled off his tongue with such casual authority that even Sarah almost believed it. The kid's expression immediately shifted to deference. Everyone at the club knew the Whitmore name carried weight. Oh, okay. Did you find the problem? Loose connection in the voltage regulator, Frank said smoothly. All fixed now. Should run smooth as silk. Great. Mrs. Whitmore will be so relieved. She's been super stressed about the tournament. As they walked back to the truck, Sarah felt a mixture of admiration and horror at how icily her father had lied, but more than that, she felt the weight of what they'd just done settling over her like a heavy blanket. Dad, what if don't? Frank said quietly. Don't start second-guessing now. She made her choice when she stole from us. Now she lives with the consequences. But as they drove home, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The device she'd built was more sophisticated than she'd admitted to Frank years. It would cause the cart to behave erratically, but the voltage spikes were designed to build over time. What started as minor electrical feedback could escalate into something much more serious. She told herself it was just a prank. Embarrassment was all Karen deserved. But deep down, Sarah knew she'd built something that could do real damage if the timing was wrong. If Karen was going too fast, if the electrical feedback hit at exactly the wrong moment. By the time they reached home, the tournament had already begun. Through their kitchen window, they could see Karen's house, still drawing power through the illegal cable that sparked this whole mess. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that Karen would be playing golf with a cart powered indirectly by the same electricity she was stealing. Frank went to lie down, the stress in his condition taking their toll. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone, knowing she could still call the country club and warn them about the cart. She could claim she'd noticed something wrong during the inspection, suggest they check the electrical system before Karen used it. But every time she reached for the phone, she thought about the ruined insulin, the doubled electricity bills, the smug smile on Karen's face as she threatened her father's medication. She thought about 40 years of her father fixing other people's problems while they looked down on him, about a lifetime of being treated as less than human by people like Karen Whitmore. At 12:47 p.m., Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her friend Maria, who worked at the country club. Holy shit. Sarah, Karen Whitmore's golf cart just went crazy during the tournament. Ambulance is on the way. Sarah's hands shook as she typed back. What happened? Cart started jerking around on the 7th hole, then threw her off when she hit the brakes. She's unconscious. Sarah, there's something seriously wrong with that cart. It's smoking and sparking like crazy. The phone slipped from Sarah's numb fingers through the wall. She could hear her father's television, some old western where the good guys always won, and justice was as simple as a showdown at high noon. But this wasn't a western, and Sarah was beginning to realize she might not be the good guy after all. Karen Whitmore was unconscious, possibly seriously injured, and Sarah had built the device that caused it. What had started as revenge for stolen electricity had become something much darker, much more dangerous. As sirens wailed in the distance, heading toward Willowbrook Country Club, Sarah sat in her kitchen and wondered if there was any way back from what she'd done. Outside, the illegal cable still stretched between the houses, carrying stolen power to Karen's empty home, a physical reminder of the crime that had started it all. But now there was a new crime to worry about, and this one had Sarah's fingerprints all over it. The knot came at 4:17 p.m., exactly 93 minutes after Sarah received Maria's text. She knew it was the police before she even looked through the peephole. 2 officers stood on her front porch, one older with gray temples and tired eyes, one younger with the eager posture of someone still believing in justice. Ms. Martinez, I'm Detective Walsh. This is Officer Chen. We'd like to ask you a few questions about the incident at Willowbrook Country Club today. Sarah's mouth went dry. What incident, ma'am? May we come in? Frank appeared in the hallway behind her, still moving slowly, but with his shoulders squared in the way that meant he was ready for a fight. What's this about? Officers? Detective Walsh consulted his notebook. Mrs. Karen Whitmore was injured today when her golf cart malfunctioned during a charity tournament. The cart appears to have been tampered with. We're speaking to anyone who might have had access to the maintenance facility. Tampered with. Sarah tried to keep her voice steady. What do you mean? Someone modified the electrical system, caused dangerous voltage spikes that made the cart unpredictable. Walsh's eyes never left Sarah's face. Mrs. Whitmore suffered a concussion and possible spinal injuries when she was thrown from the vehicle. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Spinal injuries. She'd wanted to embarrass Karen, not put her in the hospital with life-threatening injuries. I don't understand why you're here, Frank said, stepping protectively closer to his daughter. What does this have to do with us? According to the maintenance staff, you were at the country club this morning conducting an electrical inspection on Mrs. Whitmore's cart, Officer Chen said, reading from his own notes. That makes you one of the last people to handle the vehicle. Before the incident, Sarah felt the walls closing in. The lie Frank had told to get them out of the maintenance shed was now evidence of their guilt. My father does electrical work, she said carefully. If Mrs. Whitmore called for an inspection, that's the thing, Detective Walsh interrupted. Mrs. Whitmore never called for any inspection. In fact, she had no idea anyone had been working on her cart until after the accident. The silence stretched like a tightrope. Sarah could hear her heartbeat in her ears, could smell the fierce sweat gathering under her arms. Frank's hand found her shoulder, a steadying presence that somehow made everything worse, because it reminded her that she'd dragged her elderly, diabetic father into this mess. Officers, Frank said finally, if you have questions about electrical work, I'm happy to help. But I think you need to be more specific about what you're looking for. Detective Walsh flipped through his notebook. The device that caused the malfunction was sophisticated, not something an amateur would build. It was designed to create escalating voltage irregularities that would worsen over time. His eyes found Sarah's. Take specialized knowledge. Lots of people know electrical work, Sarah said, but her voice sounded thin even to her own ears. Ms. Martinez, where did you learn electrical engineering? The question caught her off guard. What? The device contained components that suggest formal training, circuit boards, voltage regulators, timing relays. This wasn't some simple wire-cutting sabotage. Someone with real expertise built this. Sarah's throat constricted. She'd graduated from the State University with a degree in electrical engineering, had worked for 2 years at a tech company before the layoffs forced her back home to help care for Frank. It was a matter of public record, probably already in their background check. I studied electrical engineering, she admitted. And you work where now? Rosie's Diner. I wait tables. Detective Walsh made a note. Electrical engineering degree, currently waiting tables. That's quite a career change. The economy's tough, Frank said, his voice carrying 40 years of dealing with condescending authority figures. My daughter's overqualified for a lot of things. Doesn't mean she's a criminal. No one's saying she's a criminal, Mr. Martinez. We're just trying to understand who had the knowledge and opportunity to modify that golf cart. Sarah's phone buzzed. Another text from Maria. Update. Karen's in surgery. Something about pressure on her spine. This is really bad, Sarah. The phone slipped from Sarah's numb fingers, clattering on the hardwood floor. Officer Chun's eyes followed the sound, noting her reaction. Bad news, Detective Walsh asked. A friend at the hospital, Sarah managed, keeping me updated on Mrs. Whitmore's condition. Thoughtful of you to be concerned about someone you claim not to know well. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Sarah realized too late that her concern for Karen's condition could be seen as guilt rather than human decency. "We're neighbors," Frank said. "Of course, we're concerned about that," Detective Walsh said, pulling out his phone. "We've been reviewing some municipal records. Seems there's been an ongoing dispute about electrical service between your properties." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. "What kind of dispute?" "Electric company has 3 separate complaints on file from this address about possible theft of service, all filed in the past month, all claiming that someone was illegally tapping into your power supply." Walsh looked up from his phone. That someone being Mrs. Whitmore. The trap was closing. Sarah could see the narrative forming in the detective's mind. Angry neighbor with electrical expertise takes revenge on woman she's accused of theft. The fact that Karen actually was stealing their power wouldn't matter if they couldn't prove it, and the illegal cable would look like circumstantial evidence at best. "Those complaints are legitimate," Frank said. "Someone's been stealing our electricity for weeks. Can you prove that?" "There's a cable running from our meter to her property," Sarah said. "You can see it from our backyard." Detective Walsh and Officer Chen exchanged glances. "We'd like to take a look at that, if you don't mind." They followed the officers into the backyard, Sarah's legs feeling like rubber with each step. But when they reached the fence line, Detective Walsh pointed to the electrical meter with a frown. "I see your meter, and I see Mrs. Whitmore's property, but I don't see any cable between them." Sarah's heart stopped. The cable was gone. Where the thick black wire had stretched between their properties for weeks, there was nothing but empty air. "It was there this morning," she said weakly. "It's been there for weeks." "What kind of cable?" Officer Chen asked, taking notes. "Heavy gauge electrical wire, probably 12 AWG, running from our meter box across the fence to her pool equipment." Detective Walsh walked the fence line, examining the ground and the electrical connections. "I don't see any evidence of additional wiring, no mounting points, no wear marks on the fence, no disturbed ground where a cable might have been buried." Frank stepped forward, his electrician's eye scanning the meter box. "Someone's been here," he said quietly. "The connections have been cleaned up, but you can see fresh wire nuts on the main feed." But even as he pointed out the evidence, Sarah knew how it looked. A hastily removed cable and some fresh connections could mean anything. Without the physical evidence of the theft, their entire story sounded like the desperate lies of people trying to justify their actions. "So let me get this straight," Detective Walsh said, closing his notebook. "You claim Mrs. Whitmore was stealing your electricity via a cable that's now mysteriously disappeared, and this alleged theft motivated someone with electrical engineering expertise to sabotage her golf cart in a way that nearly killed her." "We didn't sabotage anything," Sarah said, but the protest sounded hollow even to her. "The timing is interesting, though. Cart gets modified this morning, cable disappears this afternoon, almost like someone was cleaning up evidence." Officer Chen stepped closer to the fence line, examining the ground with the focused attention of someone trained to see what others missed. "Detective, you should look at this." He was pointing to a small section of disturbed earth near the base of the fence post. In the soft soil, clearly visible, was the impression of a heavy cable. The theft cable had left its mark in the ground, proof that Sarah and Frank had been telling the truth about the electrical theft. But Detective Walsh's expression didn't change. "That could be from any cable, garden hose, extension cord, anything." "That's not a garden hose impression," Frank said, his voice gaining strength. "That's from electrical cable, probably been lying there for weeks based on how deep the impression goes." Sarah felt a flicker of hope. The physical evidence might not prove everything, but it proved they hadn't been lying about the theft. Someone had indeed run a cable between the properties, and someone had removed it very recently. "Here's what's going to happen," Detective Walsh said, putting away his notebook. "We're going to continue our investigation. If we find evidence that either of you was involved in tampering with that golf cart, we'll be back with a warrant. In the meantime, I'd suggest you think very carefully about anything else you might want to tell us." As the officers walked back toward their patrol car, Sarah caught Detective Walsh's arm. "How is she really?" Walsh studied her face for a long moment. "Mrs. Whitmore is in surgery. The spinal cord compression is significant. The doctors aren't sure if she'll walk again." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "If she dies, this becomes a murder investigation." The words hit Sarah like a sledgehammer. Murder. Karen Whitmore might die. Robert Whitmore looked nothing like the polished politician who appeared on campaign posters around town. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd spent hours in a hospital waiting room. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Sarah's first instinct was to slam the door, but something in his voice stopped her. This wasn't the mayor coming to intimidate a constituent. This was a man whose world was falling apart. "About what?" she asked through the screen door. "About Karen? About the cable? About the truth?" Frank appeared behind Sarah, his hand resting on the baseball bat he'd kept by the front door since his union days. "You got some nerve showing up here, Whitmore." "Please," Robert said, and the words sounded like it cost him everything. "Just 5 minutes, I think. I think I owe you an explanation." Against every instinct screaming in her head, Sarah unlocked the screen door. Robert stepped into their modest living room, his eyes taking in the second-hand furniture and the medical equipment that spoke to Frank's condition. For a moment, he looked almost ashamed. "How is she?" Sarah asked, because despite everything, she needed to know. "Alive. The surgery went well, but, Robert's voice cracked. "She may never walk again. The doctors say it's too early to tell, but the spinal cord damage is extensive." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She sank onto the couch, the weight of what she'd done crushing down on her. "I never meant for this to happen." "I know," Robert said quietly. "That's why I'm here." Frank's grip tightened on the bat. "You recording this? Trying to get a confession?" "No." Robert reached into his jacket, causing Frank to tense, but he only pulled out a thick manila envelope. "I'm here to give you this." He set the envelope on their coffee table like it weighed 100 pounds. Electrical service records going back 18 months. Bank statements showing payments to an electrical contractor who doesn't exist. Photos of the cable installation. Sarah stared at the envelope as if it might explode. "I don't understand. The cable you saw wasn't the first one. Karen's been stealing electricity from you for over a year, ever since our solar installation failed the municipal inspection. She hired someone to run an illegal tap, buried most of it underground, but the final connection had to go overhead." Frank's eyes narrowed. "You knew." "I found out 6 months ago, confronted her about it." Robert's laugh was bitter. "She said it was temporary, just until we could get the solar permits straightened out. But the permits were never the problem." "Then what was?" "The permits were fine. The installation passed every inspection." Robert's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Karen killed the solar project herself, filed false complaints, bribed an inspector to fail us, all so she could keep stealing your power." The room fell silent except for the tick of Frank's old clock on the mantel. Sarah felt like she was trying to process information in a foreign language. "Why?" she finally managed. "Because she enjoyed it? The thrill of getting away with something? Of taking from people she saw as beneath her?" Robert's face twisted with disgust. She used to brag about it when she'd had too much wine. Called it her little victory over the help. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "We're not the help. We're your neighbors." To Karen, anyone who wasn't part of her social circle was the help. The Martinez family with their modest house and their blue-collar jobs. "You might as well have been invisible." Frank leaned forward, his electrician's mind working through the implications. "If you knew about the theft, why didn't you stop it?" "I tried. God help me, I tried." Robert ran his hands through his hair. "But Karen, she had something on me. Something that would have destroyed my career, my reputation, everything I'd worked for." "What?" Robert was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I've been embezzling from the municipal emergency fund. Not much, just enough to cover some bad investments, some gambling debts. Karen found out and threatened to expose me unless I let her keep stealing your power." The confession hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The mayor of their town, the man who preached fiscal responsibility at every town meeting, was a thief just like his wife. "Jesus Christ," Frank muttered. "So when the police started asking questions today, when they found the modified golf cart," Sarah's voice trailed off as understanding dawned. "I panicked. I knew they'd investigate everything, including the electrical theft. If they found evidence of Karen's cable, they'd start digging deeper, and eventually they'd find the missing municipal funds." Robert's shoulders sagged. "So I had the cable removed while she was in surgery." "You destroyed evidence to save your own ass," Frank said, his voice heavy with disgust. "Yes. And in doing so, I made you look guilty of attempted murder." Robert's eyes found Sarah's. "That's why I'm here. That envelope contains enough evidence to prove Karen was stealing your electricity, had been for over a year, and that you had every right to be angry." Sarah stared at the envelope, understanding flooding through her. "You're trying to establish our motive as justified. Your device didn't malfunction by accident. The voltage spikes were designed to escalate over time, weren't they?" The question hit like a slap. Sarah had been so focused on the immediate chaos that she'd almost forgotten the ugly truth about what she'd built. "Yes. You built it intending to cause serious harm." "No, I built it to embarrass her, to make the cart jerk around during the tournament. I never wanted her to get hurt, but you knew it could escalate beyond embarrassment." Sarah's silence was answer enough. Robert nodded grimly. "That's what I thought. Which means you're looking at assault charges at minimum. Attempted murder if the DA wants to push it." He gestured to the envelope. "But if it comes out that Karen was stealing from you, threatening your father's medication, using her position to intimidate you, ... Suddenly your actions look a lot more like justified retaliation against a systematic pattern of abuse." Frank's eyes narrowed. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing from you. You've suffered enough." Robert stood, looking older than his 53 years. "I'm resigning as mayor tomorrow, effective immediately. There'll be a special election, and I'll be moving out of state before the embezzlement investigation begins." "You're running away?" Sarah said. "I'm accepting the consequences of my choices." Finally, Robert moved toward the door, then stopped. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Karen was wrong to steal from you. I was wrong to let it continue. And you were wrong to build that device. But if I'd been a better man, none of this would have happened. After he left, Sarah and Frank sat in their living room, staring at the envelope that could save Sarah from murder charges while destroying what remained of the Whitmore family's reputation. What do we do? Sarah asked. Frank was quiet for a long time, his weathered hands folded in his lap. We tell the truth. All of it. Karen's theft, your device, Robert's cover-up. Let the chips fall where they may. Dad, if I go to prison, then I'll visit you every week until they carry me out in a box. Frank's voice was steady, final. But we don't build our freedom on lies, Mia. We're better than that. The next morning, Sarah called Detective Walsh and asked him to come back. When he arrived, she handed him the envelope Robert had left, along with a detailed confession about the voltage device she'd built and installed in Karen's golf cart. The scandal that followed made national news. The mayor's resignation, his wife's hospitalization, the revelation of both electrical theft and municipal embezzlement became a symbol of corruption in small-town America. Karen Whitmore never walked again. The spinal cord damage was permanent, confining her to a wheelchair for the rest of her life. She was ultimately charged with theft of services and conspiracy, receiving 2 years of house arrest and a substantial fine that barely dented her family's wealth. Robert Whitmore pleaded guilty to embezzlement and received 3 years in federal prison. The missing funds were repaid through the sale of their house and most of their assets. Sarah Martinez was charged with assault with a dangerous weapon and sentenced to 18 months in county jail, with the possibility of early release for good behavior. The evidence of Karen's systematic theft and intimidation was considered a mitigating factor, preventing more serious charges. Frank Martinez lived to see his daughter released after serving 11 months. He died peacefully in his sleep 6 weeks later, his insulin properly refrigerated in a house where the electricity bills had finally returned to normal. On the day of Frank's funeral, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Karen Whitmore arrived in her wheelchair, accompanied by a nurse, looking like a shadow of her former self. I wanted to apologize, Karen said, her voice lacking the condescending tone Sarah remembered, for the theft, for the threats, for everything. Sarah looked down at the woman who had once seemed so powerful, so untouchable. Now she looked small and broken, a victim of her own cruelty as much as Sarah's revenge. I'm sorry too, Sarah said finally, for what I did to you, for the device. We both made choices, Karen said quietly. We both have to live with the consequences. As Karen's wheelchair disappeared down the street, Sarah stood in the cemetery